Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on No More Half Measures, Applying Breaking Bad Principles to Good Risk and Quality Programs, presented by Dawn Carter with Centauri Health Solutions. Now to cover a few housekeeping notes, all participant lines are muted to protect your privacy. You will only see your name and the presenter's name in the participant box. There will be polling throughout the webinar today. It should pop up on your screen, but if not, please click the three dots and hit the polling function. Please submit your questions to the presenter at any time during the event through the Q&A function. They will be answered at the end of the presentation. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for taking a little bit of time out of your afternoon for a little Breaking Bad. And, how this iconic show has things that it can teach us about good risk and quality programs and revenue integrity in general. So thank you for joining me. I hope you come away with some actionable tips on how not to break bad in your risk and quality programs. And with that, we'll start with our first polling question, which is, how many of you have seen the show Breaking Bad? I just kind of want to get an idea of how many people out there might have seen this show. And of course, the choices are, yes, I have seen it, or no, I have not seen it. And so you can pop your answer in there. And here shortly, we'll pop up the results to see, how many of us have seen it and how many have not. Of course, this show is an older show. So not something that is very recent. So we have, looks like about 59% of you have seen it and 41% of you have not. But don't fear, I'm going to give you enough information without spoiling it for you to basically understand the premise. And most people, even if they haven't seen the show, understand the premise of the show. All right. And we have a second polling question that is related. And so, how many of you who have seen the show Breaking Bad liked it? And of course, our choices are I liked it, B, I did not like it. That's the wrong answer. C, I have mixed feelings about it. And D, I did not like it, but the music was great. Because I have to say, the music that accompanies this was amazing. And there are a lot of really good articles out there about how the music was selected for this show. And I actually have a playlist of the music because it was just great and had artists on it I might not otherwise have seen. All right, so 75% of you said that you liked it out of about 44 of you that we have here. 2% said they did not like it, because of course it's not for everybody, because it's let's face it, it's about drug trafficking. 23% of you have mixed feelings about it. I completely get that. And then nobody said, I did not like it, but the music was great. So, all right. Excellent. Well, thank you for humoring me to kind of find out, taking the temperature of our audience here. And with that, we're going to roll right into some of our content. All right. So, as I said, I realize, we might have some folks in the audience who have not seen this iconic show. And so I thought I'd open with a brief summary before I introduce myself a little more formally. Now, if Walter White, who is our main protagonist or antagonist, depending on how you look at it, worked in risk adjustment, he would know that his lung cancer condition is represented by HCC20 in the V28 model, but working in risk adjustment probably wouldn't pay as much as a life of crime. And so, after this dispirited high school chemistry teacher who has a pregnant wife and a disabled son gets this diagnosis of incurable lung cancer, he decides that crime pays, and he partners with the other gentleman that you see here in the photo, Jesse Pinkman, to produce and distribute crystal meth. And he does this to secure his family's financial future before he dies. And of course, he also does this while navigating the dangers of the criminal underworld and the fact that his brother-in-law Hank is a DEA agent. And as I said, this show is an older one. It premiered in January 2008 and continued for 5 seasons through September 2013, which to me is that was yesterday, it seems, but it really wasn't, a long time ago. And it has consistently been rated as one of the best television series of all time and received numerous awards. Now, because I'm always behind on TV watching, and a lot of you out there know why that is. We've got work, family, working on my doctorate. I've got all the ferret stuff I do, the AAPC, lots of stuff going on. I myself didn't watch the show until recently, and it easily became my favorite show of all time. It had been popping up for quite some time as a recommended show on Netflix, but I really didn't think I'd enjoy a show about drug trafficking, which is probably why the small number of you that didn't like it or have mixed feelings were like, really not for me. After all, my favorite shows are like dystopian or science fiction. Definitely, I got my little nerdy on here because love the science fiction. However, this show is about so much more than that, but I won't spoil it except to say that it is exceptional in every way. The plot, the themes, the actors, and the character development, the music, the cinematography, and it left me also thinking, again, nerdy, because there are lessons in it that apply to the business of healthcare. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. And it's kind of a fun way to present, a topic that can be a little bit dry and not so fun. So here you can read all about me and what qualifies me to speak to you today. And I just want to point out it is not because I know how to produce meth. We had a fun moment at Rise National when I gave an abridged version of this presentation, which you can see in the photo collage here. And this gentleman that you see right here sat down and said, "I just came for the meth." And of course, everybody laughed at that. And I said, well, there's no meth here because bail money is not one of the benefits that Centauri offers me. But hopefully, the insights that I offered and will offer to you make up for that. I think my fun Breaking Bad themed giveaways helped. And here you can see me in my Los Pollos Hermanos apron. Of course, Los Pollos Hermanos was a restaurant that featured prominently in the series, probably starting, I think, in season 3, maybe late 2. Ready to deliver those actionable insights. And I gave away these fun Los Pollos Hermanos seasoning mixes, and they actually exist. And you can go on Amazon and get you some of that seasoning mix, or even the cool apron. And I had my flair on my apron. And hopefully, some of you saw my post earlier on LinkedIn where I'm like, "Wear your flair." And I've got my I love data and then my nerdy, and in the spirit of our chemistry theme here, we've got our nerdy in the periodic table. So hopefully you have some fun flair too. So all right, moving on ahead. All right, so we've kind of got our first measure here that we're going to talk about. And this is something that a lot of you who followed me throughout the years know that I beat the drum of this constantly. And I know some of you out there who offer risk adjustment educational programs and give presentations also beat this drum, and it is that technical expertise is not enough. And so I selected this one because when faced with those insurmountable medical bills related to his HCC20, Walt realizes that he's never going to make enough money working just as a chemistry teacher. That's just not going to happen. Like so many entrepreneurs, Walt is passionate about his technical skill, which is chemistry. And so he decides he's going to start a business that has the potential to maximize the return he can get from that expertise, albeit in this case, an illegal activity. What he quickly discovers is that he knows nothing about actually running a business. which is inventory, distribution, marketing, collections, all the things. So he does what most entrepreneurs do, and he wings it at first, and he finds out with disastrous consequences that he needs to educate himself quickly on how to operate a successful business and how to outsource the things that he does not have the skill or the time to do himself. A lot of you who've seen the show probably remembered some of those very early scenes with the RV that are in some just absolutely hysterical. But at the same time, it shows this process he's going to as he realizes, I can't do this myself. I'm going to need even more than Jesse to make this successful. So, for the purposes of our discussion, the product here is not crystal meth, but it's data. And so, data as a product. Yes, it is a product and should be treated as such by the business. And the quality of that product depends not just on technical skill, but also business skills. So we've got a picture here, and this particular character's name is Gale Bedecker, and he's a chemist. This character's name is Gus Fring, and he is a big drug kingpin who operates covertly under the guise of a Los Pollos Hermanos chicken franchise owner. So it's a restaurant. And at the outset of season 4, the chemist, Gale Bedecker, discusses with Gus Fring the quality of a product that he had sampled at Fring's request. That product was the unique blue-colored meth that Walter and Jesse were producing, which was very quickly dominating the market, and Gus Fring had taken notice because he was the big guy operating in the area at the time. So in this conversation, after Fring had brought this sample to Gale Bedecker, Gale explains the difference between offering a very good product and a great product. And he says, quote, Mr. Fring, I can guarantee you a purity of 96%. I'm proud of that figure. It's a hard-earned figure. However, this other product is 99%. That last percentage, it might not sound like a lot, but it is. It's a tremendous gulf. Now, as we relate this to the data consumed by risk and quality programs, we see the cost of that remaining 4% most clearly in risk adjustment and counter data submissions. And this is regardless of the line of business you're operating in, whether it's Medicare Advantage, risk adjusting Medicaid, or commercial ACA edge submissions. Nobody likes to talk about data submission. Again, it's not sexy, it's not fun. And like me, I love data, so I think that it is, but not everybody thinks that way. But it is literally the foundation of risk and quality. Everyone knows that complete and accurate EDGE, EDPS, Medicaid submissions are critical and are required. So it's you have to comply with the law that says you must submit this data. And everybody also knows that 4% matters in terms of risk adjustment dollars when you're talking about programs that generate multi-million-dollar revenues. Also consider that an additional 4% of your data probably never even makes it through the front door as claims from providers. And so you're especially behind the 8 ball if you're not looking at this, since it won't be available for EDPS, EDGE, Medicaid submission to begin with. So that 4% is actually compounded by what doesn't get through the door due to data quality and other issues. So metrics that are focused on key performance indicators related to data completeness and accuracy are key, but they cannot be those that are specified by CMS, HHS, or Medicaid. And that's why I have over here as a half measure only utilizing those specified reporting and those measures for completeness and accuracy that come on things like report cards and the reporting that's in FM Community for ACA or any Medicaid reporting, and or not performing a leakage analysis and data inventory that extends back to the moment that the member sets foot in a provider's office. So if you have never performed a data inventory or leakage analysis, you are likely leaving that 4% plus more on the table. So what does this mean for risk and quality? Now, as part of strategic planning and operational performance improvement, it is critical to understand all parts of the revenue cycle to ensure operational quality that results in outcomes you expect through your KPIs, and to also understand that you cannot rely just on technology to make your data problems go away. And this is why we have this other half measure identified that is punting over operational improvement for risk and quality to IT with little or no or inappropriate business oversight and or excluding other data quality key stakeholders such as enrollment, claims, provider systems, care management, and so on. There are many stakeholders in risk and quality data quality. You have to invest in that care and nurturing of the data, and it's going to require all of those stakeholders to do it. And that's the role of the business, not IT. All they do is contribute to the care and feeding of the systems and the business intelligence that enable all that. And as I said, enrollment, provider systems, claims, provider relations, care management, all of these stakeholders have to have a seat at the table with appropriate KPIs that promote the operational transparency that is needed to ensure they are doing their part in the care and nurturing of that data and that data quality and data as a product. And this starts, as I said, even before a patient ever sets foot in a provider's office. So, here we are with our next polling question. How many of you have identified and can explain the root causes for the percentage that you are leaving on the table after the EDPS, EDGE, Medicaid, any submission of encounters that you're doing for your lines of business? All right, and so your choices are A, we are at 100% submission acceptance, which is awesome. Hopefully many of you are there. B is yes, we can explain them and we actively work to close the gap. C is no, we cannot explain them and we need resources to help us do so. So you're in luck if you choose that one. There are many people, such as myself, who can help you do that. And D, root cause, isn't that a kind of vegetable? So here soon we'll have some responses up here. Let's see what everybody said. All right, 8% of you, we've got 52 people who have joined us so far. 100% submission acceptance. That's awesome. And hopefully you are also doing that look back to the time that member walks through the door so that you're 100% all along the way of the revenue cycle. Let's see, 52% of you, majority, said yes, we can explain them and actively work to close the gap. Awesome. You guys are obviously treating your data as a product and taking that very seriously. 35% of you said no, we cannot explain them and need resources to help us do so. You are in luck also because there are many resources that can help you do that. I am one of those resources. And most of you know I am a very accessible and very enthusiastic advocate for you. And so you will have my information to contact me if I can help you in any way. And then 6% of you, root cause. Isn't that kind of a vegetable? Well, that's the wrong answer, but it's funny nonetheless. So let's proceed on with another polling question. All right. Now, how many of you performed that leakage analysis that I referenced on the full revenue cycle, meaning from the time the patient walks through the door, through submission to CMS, HHS, Medicaid, whatever business lines you're operating in as an encounter? Because remember, a claim is different than an encounter. Your choices are A, yes, we perform this analysis. B, no, we do not perform this analysis. C, what's a leakage analysis? Sounds like a personal problem or a digestive system, HCC. And D, we perform an analysis, but not on the full cycle. So here soon we will see what we're working with. And if you do not perform this analysis because you don't know how or don't have the tools, I have some for you that I could share, but you have to reach out to me to get them. All right. Out of 42 folks that we've got here, 26% of you say, yes, we perform this analysis. Awesome. All the way through patient walks through the door, all the way through submission as an encounter, and the responses that come back. Awesome. 26% of you said, no, we do not perform this analysis. Or 38% of you also said we perform it, but not on the full cycle. So again, I have tools, I have tips, I have tricks. Just reach out to me. We can talk about that. And then we did have some that say, what's a leakage analysis? Sounds like a personal problem or a digestive system, HCC. All right. Well, we're going to talk a little, we won't talk a lot about, how to do that because that's a little bit beyond the scope of the webinar. But again, I do have some tools and tips and tricks that I can share to help you with that if you so desire. All right. So moving along, our second point, know your stakeholders, including your members and your providers, because remember, I talked about stakeholders as all these other areas within, operations, like your provider relations, care management, enrollment, and etc. So now we're going to talk about our members and our providers, and then we're going to come back to our Breaking Bad. So throughout Breaking Bad, there are numerous instances of the DEA keeping tabs on the quality of the meth that is being sold on the street and who is being busted by the street for drug related offenses, because it gives them valuable intelligence about how and where to deploy their resources. And this is how Walt's DEA brother in law, Hank, and the DEA team became aware that there was a new meth source in town when Walt and Jesse's blue meth started circulating in the market. I also found something interesting when I think, through Wikipedia or somewhere, that there's actually no such thing as blue meth. This was something they kind of made up for the show. But it started circulating in the market in the show. And the DEA had a map where they marked the cities throughout the United States where the blue meth was showing up. And they also had this iconic map, which illustrated the relationships between the known and the unknown players who were accessing and using the new meth that was infiltrating the market. And this map showed how they identified those stakeholders. And so over here, you have these two question marks. That's Jesse and Walt. Now remember, equating this back to our data quality and our risk and quality programs. Data is your product, and you have to have effective tools that enable all stakeholders to access and use it. And so I have over here as a half measure, not having the right tools for all stakeholders to effectively access and use data that is both clinical and non-clinical, and is both structured and non-structured. And in our world of risk and quality, we deal with data that is both of these things, clinical and non-clinical, structured and non-structured. But we have AI-enabled tools now that facilitate bi-directional clinical data interchange that are ideally suited to this purposes. I saw a study recently that revealed, on average, 17 to 25% of healthcare providers' working time is spent searching for information stored outside of core systems. So if you want to be more proactive in your approach to provider clinical documentation improvement and gap closure, these tools are absolutely required. They ensure that you have access to the data you need to understand provider-based root causes of data issues and to gain accurate insights about your members that are necessary to understand their unique needs and the cost of meeting those needs, especially those related to social determinants of health. And this data will tell you a great deal about what kinds of supplemental benefits and other innovative approaches to gap closure that they may need. So, it's also identified to clearly identify all those stakeholders that we mentioned earlier related to data quality. And another half measure is not knowing that many of them are outside of risk and quality. Again, enrollment, provider relations, the members themselves, the provider, interacting with providers, they all have to have a seat at that table. Now, these tools are not useful not just for risk and quality operations, but also fraud, waste, and abuse detection and prevention. No one wants to be in the news headlines or even called out by the OIG in their fraudsters reports. And these tools enable a more proactive approach to fraud, waste, and abuse and risk mitigation. So, being able to effectively and efficiently access and use data bidirectionally will enable greater operational and financial real-time transparency to all the stakeholders, including members and providers. Gone are the days of a more reactive approach to data quality. Today's tools and technologies allow a much more proactive approach to data quality that can engage all stakeholders as long as you know who they are. All right, so now more polling questions. I promised this was going to be interactive. How many of you have both pre and post visit CDI programs that include a review of the claim before it drops? So again, this is engagement of some stakeholders here, I promise. We have, yes, we perform this analysis. No, we do not perform this analysis. we don't see the point in doing this. And then D is claim. What's a claim? So let's see how many of you are engaging some stakeholders in crafting these programs that help make sure you have complete and accurate data, especially for diagnosis code data that's critical for risk and quality programs. 39% of you said, yes, we do perform this analysis. 51% of you said, no, we do not perform this analysis. 5% of you said, we don't see the point in doing this. Wrong answer. Claim. What's a claim? That is the wrong answer. But I suppose, again, it's just kind of a fun answer. So if you don't see the point in doing this and you are not performing this, again, reach out. There are many resources in the industry who can help you understand the stakeholders that you need to perform this analysis and engage these programs that are critical to having complete and accurate data, and for you to see the point in doing it and the return on investment in doing it. All right. Next polling question. Who is the biggest stakeholder relative to data integrity and data hygiene? Data hygiene is actually a thing. We have A, providers, B, payers, C, the government, D, members, and E, all of these are stakeholders, and then some depending on the organization. So let's see who you all think are the biggest stakeholder or stakeholders relative to data as a product and its care and nurturing. So hopefully, we will see that it's actually all of these are stakeholders and then some. And luckily, 79% of you said so. 14% of you said providers. And that is, and again, this is kind of a trick question because providers are that first, that's who the members see first. So it makes sense. They could be the biggest stakeholder because that's where the data comes from. So you could say they are very much the biggest stakeholder. Payers 0%. I would tend to agree there because they're beholden to the providers in getting the data that they need. And that first, as far as data integrity is concerned, definitely not the government. Members, yes, because they are providing information. And this is important when we talk about things like social determinants of health and things that aren't necessarily clinical that absolutely affect the care and quality and things that we care about in risk and quality. So yes, members, you could say, but yes, all of these. So thank you. All right, so here we come to our third, strategic partnerships and a culture of innovation. So one of the most humorous yet telling moments in the show occurs in the pilot episode, where Walt has decided to do a ride-along with his DEA brother-in-law, and that's Hank and Hank's partner, after having had a discussion with Hank at a family gathering about how much drug dealers typically make. You guys probably remember this very well, where he was listening with great interest, Walt was, and asking questions about how much money they make from a typical drug bust. Walt is hearing this after his cancer diagnosis and after he intense worrying about how his pregnant wife and disabled son would fare without him in the picture should the worst happen. Now, in this scene is to me one of the most hilarious ones, and it was just so well done. They're sitting in a car outside a house where a sting operation on a meth lab is about to go down. So he's on this ride along with Hank. And when the DEA moves in to make the bust, Walt, who is looking on from the car, because obviously they weren't going to include him with all the guns and the busting that was going to happen, he looks up at a second story window of the meth house where this bust is happening. And who does he see hurriedly climbing out of the window but one Jesse Pinkman, who you can see here in this picture, in his underwear and desperately trying to pull on his pants after having been with a woman on the second floor of the house in this meth house. So he loses his balance trying to put on his pants and falls to the ground into some bushes. He gets up and runs off, but not before Walt, with an equal mixture of fascination and horror, recognizes him as a former student in the high school where Walt teaches. So funny scene, but also just iconic with that realization that, wow, this is the guy that can help me, where you can just see it on Walt's face, this moment of realization can help me here. And then who can forget this moment that's depicted here When Walter showed up later at Jesse's house with this proposition, you know the business, obviously, because he had seen Jesse at the scene of this meth bust, and I know the chemistry. And there were other things that where Walt realized that Jesse was kind of a kingpin in the area when it came to meth production. So from the outset in the show's pilot, Walter recognizes the need for Jesse Pinkman's skills. Walt brings the chemistry, technical, Jesse brings the business. And remember how we talked about in that our first point about, having resources at your disposal for inventory, distribution, all those things. And Walt realizes over time that he needs that. So he traps a very reluctant Jesse, shown here, decidedly looking very unexcited by this proposition, into a partnership. And as the show progresses, Walter White must adapt his methods to stay ahead of the competition and changing circumstances, mirroring the need for flexibility and innovation in business processes. And because in risk and quality, we have regulations that are ever changing, particularly now with a new administration. We've got to be flexible and we have to be adaptable. And especially if you are on the Medicaid side with a lot of cuts that are coming down the pipeline. And even in Medicare Advantage, there was so much focus on health equity, social determinants of health, and these other things. Now pivots are happening. So you've got to be flexible, have to be innovative to change, stay ahead of the competition and ahead of changing circumstances. So in risk and quality, this requires a great deal of partnership, and the care and nurturing of our friend data is at the center. Now, here are some reasons why a culture and partnership are important. It allows us to respond to emerging needs. Adapting to new patient demographics, disease patterns, and community health challenges requires this. And the ability to quickly embrace technological developments is also why partnerships are important, because this is integrating new digital tools like telehealth, electronic health records, data analytics, and many other things that enhance patient care, they streamline operations, and they facilitate informed decision making. Also, it's important to make sure that you are, automating the ingest, indexing, and routing of data, both structured and unstructured. That is critical, and this can be accomplished with AI-enabled tools, as I mentioned earlier. This will produce the most immediate gain and prevent data from being siloed, such that it can't be leveraged for the best data-driven decisions across the enterprise. And a good example of this is prior authorization. We hear a lot about this in the news, and rightfully so. And a lot of the bottlenecks that are created there is because these processes are not automated and are not standardized. And so very important as you are doing those examinations and your leakage analysis to take a look at where data is being siloed and is not available for others to make decisions. So there are challenges, of course, in adapting and innovating. There's challenges to everything that we do, and they result a lot of times in these half measures that you see here on the screen. And there are these challenges that you need to consider are things like resistance to change. Healthcare professionals and organizations may be hesitant to adopt new practices due to concerns about disruption to existing workflows or lack of understanding about new technologies. Now, a good example of this relates to clinical documentation improvement programs that incorporate business intelligence that are both pre and post visit, like we talked about earlier. And that's why I actually asked that polling question. Developing these programs with stakeholder input not only increases your chances for successful uptake, but also supports success in your risk and quality programs as data completeness and accuracy improves. There are a number of tools in the market that facilitate these programs, and many organizations have developed their own business intelligence for this purpose, using software solutions that offer varying levels of functionality. And the RISE organization is a good one that kind of brings those to the fore, and and brings organizations to the table for webinars and RISE National and the risk adjustment forums and other places where these are shared. So you can see the innovative things that others are doing in the space to facilitate these partnerships that are so critical. Also, another challenge is financial constraints, money. Implementing new innovations can require significant upfront investments, which may be challenging for healthcare systems and health plans with limited budgets. Remember the leakage analysis that I discussed earlier? That is part of your toolkit to justify the investment in the people, processes, and technologies that you need to provide the care and nurturing to your most important asset and product, which is your data. So, use that leakage analysis to find the money that's going to justify the investment that you need in those resources that are unique to what you're trying to do with your culture of innovation and your partnerships. And then regulatory complexities. Of course, I'm all about the regulatory aspect. That's what I do at Centauri. Navigating complex regulatory landscapes can certainly hinder the adoption of new technologies or treatment approaches. For example, there are recent proposed changes to HIPAA related to cybersecurity that profoundly affect anyone in the business of healthcare, especially small to medium-sized entities. And failure to understand the impact and comply could not only result in costly fines and harm to patients, but also unwelcome attention in the media. All of us remember getting that letter from Change Healthcare. A lot of us in the United States did. And all the headlines and all of they come with that. Nobody wants that. Also, data privacy concerns, another challenge. Ensuring that patient data security and privacy when utilizing digital tools and platforms is very important. Again, recent proposed amendments to HIPAA related to cybersecurity and privacy in the modern digital age illustrate the importance of prioritizing compliance with privacy and security requirements. Given the significant risks inherent in the costly and harmful breaches and cyber attacks. And so here I've got some half measures that I mentioned, caring for and nurturing those data assets and silos that make strategy development and partnerships difficult. And then there's risk of an inability to fully assess risks and rewards of whatever it is you're trying to do. So care for and nurture those data assets through strategic partnerships. That's part of your culture of innovation. Again, not very sexy, not very fun, absolutely necessary. Care for that data. Half measure is not fully embracing strategic interoperability through thoughtful use of automation and standardization, preferably AI enabled. Most tools on the market today do offer AI enabled solutions to do this. Third half measure, not strategically investing in those people, processes, and technologies that have the greatest ROI related to risk and quality programs. How are you going to know that? By doing things like leakage analysis, using those tools to find out where the money and where the data is leaking. And then fourth, last but certainly not least, skimping on spending for cybersecurity and data privacy strategy. Recently, I don't know how many of you in the audience were involved with the comment period that happened where CMS, where actually HHS was soliciting, comments on the proposed privacy and security changes. Reading the comments, there are a lot of them that are related to the cost for mostly small and medium-sized entities to comply. However, most of us would argue that the costs of non-compliance are far more than the costs for compliance. And so in the end, hopefully that will result in some maybe staggered implementation or access to resources to help small and medium entities comply or help with the costs. Hopefully that's kind of where we will end up, but it remains to be seen where we end up. But definitely, you don't want to skimp on spending for those things. That's why it's last, but certainly not least. All right. Another polling question. How many of you regularly meet with stakeholders to discuss challenges like the ones we talked about in cultivating strategic partnerships and a culture of innovation and how to overcome them? And your choices are A, yes, we regularly meet. B, no, we do not meet, but we know that we should. Or meetings take place and there's planning, but really no action. C, I think there are meetings, but I'm really not sure. And D, which is the wrong answer, hint, we do not see the value in such meetings. So let's see what the temperature is out there. How many folks are regularly meeting with stakeholders? Great. 61% of you say, yes, we regularly meet. Awesome. 19% of you say, no, we do not meet, but we know we should. Or meetings take place and there's planning but no action. So it's at least good that you're meeting, and maybe you are struggling with, oh, how do we more effectively plan? How do we take action? Again, tools, vendors, consultants, many great folks out there in the industry who can help you do that. If you need some quick, let me know. And then some of you said, I think there's meetings, but not sure. And then the box went away before I could tell we do not see the value in such meetings. Hopefully that was 0%, because there absolutely is value in such meetings. And I just told you why there are value in such meetings. Oh, 6%. Um, we do not see the value in such meetings. Okay. There absolutely is value in such meetings. And it's not just about the money, but it's also about the member experience. Again, serving those stakeholders, your members and your providers as stakeholders, as well as the others across the enterprise. All right. Thank you. So now we're going to move on here. Now, the actor who played Jesse, his name is Aaron Paul, and he's pictured here. This is Aaron Paul. He liked this quote that is over here on the right-hand side of your screen so much that he actually had it tattooed on his arm, and it is pictured here. And those of you who are at Rise National and attended my roundtable, I had temporary tattoos actually that said no half measures. And I love this quote, and I'm going to read it just because it's so impactful. I chose a half measure when I should have gone all the way. I'll never make that mistake again. No more half measures, Walter. And that's from a character named Mike Ehrmantraut, who was Gus Fring's enforcer in Breaking Bad. Now, the key word in this quote is measure. Now, in this quote, Mike is referring to a situation when he worked as a beat cop. And in one case, he tried to stop a wife beater by threatening him. But the man killed his wife shortly after. Mike tells Walt that he chose a half measure by warning the husband instead of killing him. Now, half measures is an idiom that means a policy or a plan of action that is weak and doesn't do enough. Now, I want you to take just a moment to think about a decision you recently made that led to a poor outcome in our world of risk and quality. And we'll have that moment of silence, just a moment for you to think about that. It's okay. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes or make half measures. All right. Did you think of one? Remember, data, baby. Now, chances are your decision was a half measure. Now, in our world, it is very easy to quantify the results of half measures in terms of risk-adjusted dollars and care outcomes for quality, and very easy to quantify the cost of incomplete and inaccurate data. And again, tools like leakage analysis and claim inventories and things like that help you do that. It is also just as easy to calculate the ROI for the people, processes, and technologies that you need to ensure there are no half measures, and these should include AI-enabled tools that support interoperability, leakage analyses, claim inventories, all the things that I've been talking about along the way. All right. So after talking about half measures and what those half measures might be, and some strategies that you might consider to not have half measures, to have no more half measures, I have a question. For those of you who haven't seen the show, do you now want to go and watch it? And A is yes, B is no, C is maybe. I would just love to know, knowing what you know now about this show, and the nerdiness that I employ by thinking about how it applies to business, how many of you might want to watch the show? It's okay if you don't. All right, what do our results say? 50% say yes, 2% say no, 48% say maybe. Great. It's on Netflix for anybody who wants to watch it. Originally, of course, it was not. It was a show that was produced where weekly episodes were happening, but now it's a good binge show because I binged it, and I copped to many times, staying up way too late watching it because it was that good. So you need another show to binge, put that on your list. Also, put Better Call Saul on your list because that is one of the, it's like a sequel kind of show, or a prequel, actually. It's a prequel that takes one of the characters, Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad, who was the lawyer that Jesse and Walt end up using to kind of get out of some scrapes and deal with some of the drug underworld. There's a whole show based on that character that is actually very, very good and is rated as one of the best shows of all time in its own right. So put that also on your list. All right. That leads us to our next polling question. All right, we've got, did you learn something in this session? A is, yes, I learned that crime and half measures do not pay. B, no, I already knew all of these things, and we do not have half measures in our risk and quality strategies. And I hope everybody answers it that way. Or A. C, where can we reach out to find out more about this topic? And you'll find about that in a minute. So hopefully you did learn something in this session, even if you already knew that crime and half measures don't pay. Hopefully you learned a little something that's actionable that you can take back to your staff and put into place. So, what do we have? All right, 72. Yes, I learned that crime and half measures do not pay. And 8% of you said, no, I already knew all of these things, and we do not have half measures in our risk and quality strategies. Awesome. And then 21% of you said, where can we reach out to find out more about this topic? All right, so I'm going to tell you where you can find out more about this topic. All right, so here is my contact information. I pride myself, as most of you out there, if you know me, know this. I pride myself on being a very accessible expert. If you message me, I will always answer, or say, let me get back to you. Let me find that answer for you. Often I might connect you with another resource, but all of my information is also in the chat. Our Rise has popped that over into the chat so that you've got the links to my LinkedIn where you can find me. I try to be pretty active on LinkedIn, posting content of my own, reposting other content that's really great. And again, across a wide variety of topics. I also have a link tree where you can find links to a lot of the articles I've written, again, across a wide variety of topics there, as well as access to other webinars that I've given on a variety of subjects, such as social determinants of health. That I do a lot of work with that, as well as risk adjustment, revenue cycle in general, wide variety of topics. And it can be all found there at my link tree. And then there is my email address. So you can reach me there as well. And so I invite anybody to contact me at any time, and I'm always happy to help. And with that, I'm going to thank you. And let's pop over here into the chat to see what kind of questions we might have. And hopefully, some of those might roll in. If not, a question that I do get pretty frequently after I give a webinar like this that is very heavy on things like best practices or half measures in this case is, wow, this is pretty overwhelming. Where do we start? What would be a good starting place if, we're an organization that doesn't really do a whole lot with strategic partnerships and engaging stakeholders and all these things we're talking about. Never fear. I always say, begin at the beginning, right? It's always great to start with, tracing that journey of your members. If you're a health plan, if you're a health system, whatever you might be, before that patient even walks in the door. And for a lot of you, that might be patient access. And in fact, I'm actually giving a webinar focused on patient access later in the year because they have a critical role in this. And a lot of times when we are working in risk and quality, we don't really see that because we're not there at the provider's office or interacting with people that are performing patient access functions. So think about folks that are doing registration, scheduling, insurance verification, all very important. So begin at the beginning with that journey of a claim as the member comes in, has the service, there's a claim, There's diagnosis and procedure coding that's happening. That claim, there's an EMR processes that are happening that transmit that claim to a payer. Payers got all kinds of rules that apply to that claim and whether it's clean or not, whether it's rejected, whether it's denied, and there's a difference between those two, whether it's paid, partially paid, subject to capitation, whatever the case may be. And then, of course, when that payer, if they're in a risk-adjusted market, has to send that as an encounter to somewhere, whether it's Edge Server for ACA commercial, whether it's EDPS for Medicare Advantage or for Medicaid, it's got to go somewhere. And then there's reporting that comes back on whether or not those entities accepted, rejected, whatever, there's a disposition that they do. And you have to do that full accounting. And it's like, where did it get lost? Because remember, that 4% makes a difference. And anything that you might not even be aware of before it even goes as an encounter is very important to account for as well. So tracing that journey of a claim and just mapping it out, sort of like value stream mapping it out to say, where is it going? Where is it possibly getting lost is a good place to start in terms of identifying those data bottlenecks and then investigating the root causes where you're seeing those bottlenecks. Maybe you are seeing a trend where a lot of claims from particular providers are not making it through the clearinghouse. They're just flat out rejecting. And you take a look at it and it's like, oh, wow, these providers, and you can do some provider profiling and say, they're not even using ICD-10 codes. I'm just making that up. Or they're using CPT codes that aren't valid for this year. Or they're having a problem with certain modifiers or NCCI edits. There's any number of reasons, of course, things could be stuck, not even making it through the door at the clearinghouse. So looking at those, because that's money left on the table, and that's also claims that might be needed for quality measures. So lots of ramifications just based on clearinghouses alone. Or maybe internally, you've got a lot of things that are getting denied, for prior authorization problems. And maybe it's because the system that's doing care management and prior auths isn't talking to the claim system. I see that a lot. And those have some technical fixes that can happen. Or you might even want to look at, hey, are there things that really don't require an auth and we need to load that list in the system so these claims can go through a little more seamlessly. So those are some examples, places to start. Look at where, automation might benefit you or further standardization, where are those data bottlenecks happening? That's where I say to start. Begin at the beginning, trace that claim trajectory all the way through where it has to go, look at those bottlenecks, get to the root causes of why those bottlenecks are happening. You might need a technical fix, you might need a person to help. It'll all kind of, become apparent once you start doing that analysis. So that's kind of my best advice on where to start if you aren't really doing anything in terms of your data hygiene. So last call for any other questions. We've got just a few more minutes left. All right. I think that we can probably call it a day. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to spend with me. Hopefully you came away with some actionable strategies or nuggets of wisdom. And if you have questions, like after we close the webinar and you're like, oh, I do have a question, or after kind of digesting what was said, you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm very happy to help. And if you are interested, of course, in, any of the, risk and quality supportive tools we have here at Centauri, we're also happy to help you there. So thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I'll see you sometime at a RISE event or somewhere else in the industry. Come say hi to me. So thank you so much.